Welcome back to our study of the book of Daniel. This week, you're going to focus on Daniel chapter 5. Now, this chapter describes a raucous party given by King Belshazzar. History tells us that Belshazzar was the grandson of King Nebuchadnezzar. From the story, we see that he was a pagan king and he had absolutely zero regard for the God who had humbled his grandfather. He's living it up publicly at this party, and he's thumbing his nose at God by serving his guests alcohol from the holy vessels his grandfather had plundered from the Jewish temple. As bad as this party is, it's also a major turning point in the history of the Israelites. There are some pretty amazing things that come as a result of this party. First, the kingdom of Babylon is overthrown this very night. Now, I told you in a previous video that according to Herodotus, Cyrus conquered the Babylonian Empire by marching his armies through the river that divided the city. By diverting the water, they were able to easily enter the city. It didn't take long to conquer the unsuspecting and very overconfident Babylonians. The leaders of Babylon were all drunk and partying when this happened, which made it even easier for Cyrus. What a difference a day makes. 1 minute Belshazzar is partying, and the next he is dead and his kingdom is overtaken. Now, the second interesting thing about this event is that it is the first fulfillment of the prophecy that Daniel interpreted from Daniel chapter 2. You'll remember that Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom of gold is followed by a kingdom of silver in the statue in his dream. Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar, "And after you, another kingdom will arise, inferior to you, and then a third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over all the earth." This first change of power from the golden kingdom to the silver kingdom happens this very night. Daniel witnesses it. This single event is confirmation that the prophecy is true and the prophet is genuine. And the third significant thing about this evening is that the new leader will usher in the end of the 70-year exile that was prophesied by both Isaiah and Jeremiah. Let's take a look at Jeremiah chapter 25, verse 11. This is what it says. "This whole land shall come to a ruin and a waste, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. There is the timestamp, 70 years. The exile to Babylon would last 70 years. Now take a look at Jeremiah 51, verse 11. "Sharpen the arrows, take up the shields. The Lord has stirred up the spirit of the king of the Medes, because his purpose concerning Babylon is to destroy it. For that is the vengeance of the Lord, the vengeance for his temple." Here, Jeremiah predicts that Babylon is destroyed as an act of God avenging his temple. That partying with the temple vessels was a serious matter. And if we turn over to the book of Ezra, chapter 1, and look at verses 1 through 4, we see Cyrus, another king, being used by God to accomplish his purposes. Now, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he sent a proclamation throughout his kingdom, and also put it in writing, saying, "This is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says. The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to rebuild for him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever there is among you of all his people, may his God be with him. Go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem, and every survivor at whatever place he may live, the people of that place are to support him with silver and gold, with equipment and cattle, together with a voluntary offering for the house of God, which is in Jerusalem. It's interesting that this decree comes really fast during the very first year of Cyrus's rule. Cyrus reigned over Persia between 539 and 530 BC. That's roughly 9 years. In fact, we are told Daniel served until at least the third year of King Cyrus. That would be approximately 536 BC, and you'll find that in Daniel chapter 10. That being the case, Daniel likely had some personal influence in this decree that Cyrus gave. The historian Josephus tells us that Cyrus was informed of the biblical prophecies written about him. Because Daniel continued on as a high-ranking official in Persia, it's natural to assume that he would have shown the scrolls to Cyrus. Now, one final note on this chapter. Don't let the last verse of Daniel chapter 5 confuse you. Let me read it for you. I'll look at the last two verses actually, verse 30 and 31. That same night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed. So Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about the age of 62. Now, for Daniel's purposes, he's not trying to recount the details of history, but rather he's telling us his story based on the major events of his life. Again, we know from history that Cyrus the Persian conquered Babylon in 539 BC, and he ruled those 9 years until 530 BC. We also know from history that Darius the Mede, mentioned here at the end of chapter 5, ruled for only 2 short years, from 538 to 536 BC. His rule started a year after Cyrus invaded Babylon. So in Daniel's story, Darius is important because he's the guy that throws Daniel into the lion's den. And you're going to read about that next week. But for now, what you need to know is that the Medo-Persian Empire was enormous. And most scholars believe that Cyrus appointed his nephew Darius to rule over one territory of that empire, Babylon. That appointment was made sometime during the first year after the takeover of Babylon. Darius plays a big role in Daniel's story, which is why Daniel mentions him at the end of chapter 5, because he's now transitioning into chapter 6, into the story of the lion's den. So to review, chapter 5 in Daniel is a pivotal chapter. It's a chapter that records the transition from the Babylonian Empire to the Medo-Persian Empire, and Cyrus was the king that conquered Babylon. This transition confirms Daniel as a true prophet, and this transition signals the end of the 70-year exile that was predicted by Jeremiah. But Daniel's not finished with his story yet, and for that, you're going to need to hang on to chapter 6.